Hi class, welcome to the first lecture. Thanks for being a little bit flexible with this. Like I said, I'm out because of surgery, so we're gonna do a little bit of this digitally. I'm gonna make my image go away, but I'll be continuing to talk through the lecture, and we're gonna be watching some videos, so I hope you enjoy. All right, so clearly this is nutrition and aging, and I love this graphic, and I think that it really is kind of a cycle from early childhood when you're very dependent on people to middle adulthood and then to aging, or as you get older when you may find yourself continuing to be a little bit more dependent on people. But I just really love this picture. I think it's all going full circle. So about me, this is on the right, a picture of me using an aging app, and on the left is a picture of my mom. So I just thought that was funny to share, but clearly I'm your teacher. I'm not as old as my mom, but you can find aging apps that will make your face look like you might look when you get older. And I found that the resemblance to my mother was surprising. So I thought I'd share that with you. As I said in the syllabus, I'm a registered dietitian, certified nutrition support clinician, diabetes educator. I work primarily with elderly people in kidney disease, and I've been teaching at Poly for 6 years, and I love this class. It's my favorite. Okay, so as I mentioned in the syllabus, volunteering is going to be a big part of this course. You're going to get 100 points of your total course grade are going to be coming from volunteering, as well as the paper that you write after you volunteer. And so these are some pictures of students at Garden House with seniors in the community and at Senior Nutrition Program doing recipe samples. And all the students really, really loved their experiences, so I hope you will too. This is an additional group of girls that I took to the Morro Bay Senior Fair. This was 2 years ago. I also had some ladies participate this year, and we had food to hand out. We did trivia with the seniors. We talked about supplements and just overall good health for the seniors in Morro Bay, and that was really fun. So, aging. These are some questions to ponder, and we'll talk about them more as we get into the class. But what is aging? At what age do you consider someone old? And you don't have to lie. I won't be offended. Are you looking forward to getting old, or do you have other emotions? I hear from students usually a mix of emotions. Some people are looking forward to it because they can retire and maybe travel and enjoy grandkids or do some of their hobbies. And other people are a little bit more wary of it because they're worried maybe about disability or debility or not having enough money to retire, or illness or dementia. So I always hear both views. Are there words to describe aging? There are lots of words to describe aging. Our book has some words that I'm not the most fond of, but our book describes aging as intrinsic, meaning it has to happen. It's innate to a person. Deleterious, universal, it happens to everybody. Progressive, it continues to occur on a greater level. And irreversible. And the irreversible, there is a big camp of scientists trying to work that one out. Also, same thing with universal and preventive. So there's a really, really big push in an anti-aging community right now, trying to expand on lifespan and health span. Why would nutrition be important to aging? Well, we have an entire class for you to find out. But nutrition can prevent many age-related diseases, as well as can provide healthy muscles as you age, healthy bones, intact cognitive function, vision, heart health, just the gamut of things. So we're going to learn about all the reasons nutrition is important. Aging. So aging occurs on an individual timetable. What that means is not everybody ages at the same rate or pace. And you can't necessarily look at somebody and tell your age. You might be able to tell that they're older or younger, but it is hard sometimes to tell the actual age. The process of aging is referred to as senescence. And I have that word on the next slide, but it's called senescence with an S. And senescence is a result of irreversible cellular damage and the inability of cellular repair to keep up with this cellular damage. And cells can actually become senescent, which is kind of like being dormant. So they don't disappear, they're not destroyed in our body, but they're no longer functional, as in they don't do what they were originally meant to do. However, instead, they produce some secretions, and sometimes these secretions are actually harmful. Like, for example, they produce some inflammatory cytokines that can make inflammation worse. So our body has a natural process of getting rid of senescent cells, but we're not always doing this at an appropriate pace. And you'll hear me talking more about senescent cells quite a bit through the quarter. There is a new class of anti-aging supplements that are called anti-senolytic drugs, and these are to try to reduce senescence in cells. And many of them actually have some kind of a nutrition base. So we'll learn more about that. Where people live the longest. So there are different ways to study nutrition and aging, and my approach to the class is how can we live the longest, healthiest lives possible versus just talking about all the illnesses that occur and what we can do about them after. I want to give you information on healthy longevity for yourself, your parents, your grandparents, anybody you work with in the future. And I think we can really learn from other societies that have exemplified healthy aging, and the blue zones are a good example of that. So the blue zones are areas in the world where there are more centenarians than anywhere else. And centenarians are people who live to be 100 or more. These are the hot spots. There's one in California, Loma Linda, California, Costa Rica, Greece, Italy, and Japan. And so we'll watch this video and you can take some notes about the location of the blue zones, as well as some of the things that they have in common, especially related to nutrition and lifestyle. So I'll be playing this video right now.
Something called the Danish twin study established that only about 10% of how long the average person lives within certain biological limits is dictated by our genes. The other 90% is dictated by our lifestyle. So the premise of Blue Zone is if we can find the optimal lifestyle of longevity, we can come up with a de facto formula for longevity. But if you ask the average American what the optimal formula of longevity is, they probably couldn't tell you. They've probably heard of the South Beach diet or the Atkins diet, and you have the USDA food pyramid. There's what Oprah tells us. There's what Dr. Oz tells us. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of confusion around what really helps us live longer, better. Should you be running marathons or doing yoga? Should you eat organic meat or should you be eating tofu? When it comes to supplements, should you be taking them? How about these hormones or resveratrol? And does purpose play into it? Spirituality, and how about how we socialize? Well, our approach to finding longevity was to team up with National Geographic and the National Institute on Aging to find the 4 demographically confirmed areas that are geographically defined, and then bring a team of experts in there to methodically go through exactly what these people do to distill down the cross-cultural distillation. And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you what that distillation is. But first, I'd like to debunk some common myths when it comes to longevity. And the first myth is if you try really hard, you can live to be 100. False. The problem is only about 1 out of 5,000 people in America live to be 100. Your chances are very low. Even though it's the fastest growing demographic in America, it's hard to reach 100. The problem is that we are not programmed for longevity. We are programmed for something called procreative success. I love that word. It reminds me of my college days. Biologists term procreative success to mean the age where you have children, and then another generation, the age when your children have children. After that, the effect of evolution completely dissipates. If you're a mammal, if you're a rat or an elephant or a human in between, it's the same story. So to make it to age 100, you not only have to have had a very good lifestyle, you also have to have won the genetic lottery. The second myth is there are treatments that can help slow, reverse, or even stop aging. False. When you think of it, there's 99 things that can age us. Deprive your brain of oxygen for just a few minutes, those brain cells die, they never come back. Play tennis too hard on your knees, ruin your cartilage, that cartilage never comes back. Our arteries can clog, our brains can gunk up with plaque, and we can get Alzheimer's. There's just too many things to go wrong. Our bodies have 35 trillion cells. Trillion with the T, we're talking national debt numbers here. Those cells turn themselves over once every 8 years, and every time they turn themselves over, there's some damage. And that damage builds up, and it builds up exponentially. It's a little bit like the days when we all had Beatles albums or Eagles albums, and we'd make a copy of that on a cassette tape and then let our friends copy that cassette tape. And pretty soon, with successive generations, that tape sounds like garbage. Well, the same things happen to our cells. That's why a 65-year-old person is aging at a rate of about 125 times faster than a 12-year-old person. So if there's nothing you can do to slow your aging or stop your aging, what am I doing here? Well, the fact of the matter is the best science tells us that the capacity of the human body, my body, your body, is about 90 years, a little bit more for women. But life expectancy in this country is only 78. So somewhere along the line, we're leaving about 12 good years on the table. These are years that we could get, and research shows that they would be years largely free of chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. We think the best way to get these missing years is to look at the cultures around the world that are actually experiencing them. Areas where people are living to age 100 at rates up to 10 times greater than we are. Areas where the life expectancy is an extra dozen years, and the rate of middle-age mortality is a fraction of what it is in this country. We found our first blue zone about 125 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia, and not the entire island. The island's about 1.4 million people, but only up in the highlands, an area called the Nuoro province. And here we have this area where men live the longest, about 10 times more centenarians than we have here in America. And this is a place where people not only reach age 100, they do so with extraordinary vigor. Places where 102-year-olds still ride their bike to work, chop wood, and can beat a guy 60 years younger than them. Their history actually goes back to about the time of Christ. It's actually a Bronze Age culture that's been isolated. Because the land is so infertile, they're largely shepherds, which occasions regular low-intensity physical activity. Their diet is mostly plant-based, accentuated with foods that they can carry into the fields. They came up with an unleavened whole wheat bread called nota musica, made out of durum wheat, a type of cheese made from grass-fed animals. So it's hot. The cheese is high in omega-3 fatty acids instead of omega-6 fatty acids from corn-fed animals, and a type of wine that has 3 times the level of polyphenols than any known wine in the world. It's called Cananao. But the real secret, I think, lies more in the way that they organize their society. And one of the most salient elements of the Sardinian society is how they treat older people. You ever notice here in America, social equity seems to peak at about age 24? Just look at the advertisements. Here in Sardinia, the older you get, the more equity you have, the more wisdom you're celebrated for. You go into the bars in Sardinia, instead of seeing the Sports Illustrated swimsuit calendar, you see the Centenarian of the Month calendar. This, as it turns out, is not only good for your aging parents to keep them close to the family, it imparts about 4 to 6 years of extra life expectancy. Research shows it's also good for the children of those families who have lower rates of mortality and lower rates of disease. That's called the grandmother effect. We found our second blue zone on the other side of the planet, about 800 miles south of Tokyo on the archipelago of Okinawa. Okinawa is actually 161 small islands. And in the northern part of the main island, this is ground zero for world longevity. This is a place where the oldest living female population is found. It's a place where people have the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. They have what we want. They live a long time and tend to die in their sleep very quickly. And often, I can tell you, after sex. They live about 7 good years longer than the average American, 5 times as many centenarians as we have in America, 1/5 the rate of colon and breast cancer, big killers here in America, and 1/6 the rate of cardiovascular disease. And the fact that this culture has yielded these numbers suggests strongly they have something to teach us. What do? Once again, a plant-based diet full of vegetables with lots of color in them, and they eat about 8 times as much tofu as Americans do. More significant than what they eat is how they eat it. They have all kinds of little strategies to keep from overeating, which, as you know, is a big problem here in America. A few of the strategies we observe, they eat off of smaller plates. They tend to eat fewer calories at every sitting. Instead of serving family style, where you can sort of mindlessly eat as you're talking, they serve at the counter, put the food away, and then bring it to the table. They also have a 3,000-year-old adage, which I think is the greatest sort of diet suggestion ever invented. It was invented by Confucius. And that diet is known as the Hara Hachi Bu diet. It's simply a little saying these people say before their meal to remind them to stop eating when their stomach is 20% full. It takes about a half hour for that full feeling to go travel from your belly to your brain. And by remembering to stop at 80%, it helps keep you from doing that very thing. But like Sardinia, Okinawa has a few social constructs that we can associate with longevity. We know that isolation kills. 15 years ago, the average American had 3 good friends. We're down to 1.5 right now. If you were lucky enough to be born in Okinawa, you were born into a system where you automatically have a half a dozen friends with whom you travel through life. They call it a moai. And if you're in a moai, you're expected to share the bounty if you encounter luck. And if things go bad, a child gets sick, a parent dies, you always have somebody who has your back. This particular moai, these 5 ladies have been together for 97 years. Their average age is 102. Typically in America, we've divided our adult life up into 2 sections. There's our work life, where we're productive, and then one day, boom, we retire. And typically that is meant retiring to the easy chair or going down to Arizona to play golf. In the Okinawan language, there's not even a word for retirement. Instead, there's one word that imbues your entire life, and that word is ikigai. And roughly translated, it means the reason for which you wake up in the morning. And for this 102-year-old karate master, his ikigai was carrying forth this martial art. For this 100-year-old fisherman, it was continuing to catch fish for his family 3 times a week. And this is a question. The National Institute on Aging actually gave us a questionnaire to give these centenarians. And one of the questions, they were very culturally astute people put the questionnaire. One of the questions was, what is your ikigai? They instantly knew why they woke up in the morning. For this 102-year-old woman, her ikigai was simply her great, great, great granddaughter. 2 girls separated in age by 101.5 years. And I asked her what it felt like to hold a great, great, great granddaughter. And she put her head back and she said, it feels like leaping into heaven. I thought that was a wonderful thought. My editor at Geographic wanted me to find America's blue zone. And for a while, we looked on the prairies of Minnesota, where actually there's a very high proportion of centenarians, but that's because all the young people left. So we turned to the data again, and we found America's longest lived population among the Seventh-day Adventists concentrated in and around Loma Linda, California. Adventists are conservative Methodists. They celebrate their Sabbath from sunset on Friday till sunset on Saturday, a 24-hour sanctuary in time, they call it. And they follow 5 little habits that conveys to them extraordinary longevity, comparatively speaking. In America here, life expectancy for the average woman is 80, but for an Adventist woman, their life expectancy is 89, and the difference is even more pronounced among men, who are expected to live about 11 years longer than their American counterparts. Now, this is a study that followed about 70,000 people for 30 years, sterling study, and I think it supremely illustrates the premise of this Blue Zone project. This is a heterogeneous community. It's white, black, Hispanic, Asian. The only thing they have in common are a set of very small lifestyle habits that they follow ritualistically for most of their lives. They take their diet directly from the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where God talks about legumes and seeds, and on one more stanza about green plants, ostensibly missing his meat. They take this sanctuary in time very serious. For 24 hours every week, no matter how busy they are, how stressed out they are at work, where the kids need to be driven, they stop everything and they focus on their God, their social network, and then hardwired right in the religion are nature walks. And the power of this is not that it's done occasionally. The power is it's done every week for a lifetime. None of it's hard. None of it costs money. Adventists also tend to hang out with other Adventists. So if you go to an Adventist party, you don't see people swilling Jim Beam or rolling a joint. Instead, they're talking about their next nature walk, exchanging recipes, and yes, they pray. But they influence each other in profound and measurable ways. This is a culture that has yielded Ellsworth Wareham. Ellsworth Wareham is 97 years old. He's a multimillionaire. Yet when a contractor wanted $6,000 to build a privacy fence, he said, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. So for the next 3 days, he was out shoveling cement and hauling poles around. And predictably, perhaps, on the 4th day, he ended up in the operating room. But not as the guy on the table, the guy doing open heart surgery. At 97, he still does 20 open heart surgeries every month. Ed Rawlings, 103 years old now, an active cowboy, starts his morning with the swim, and on the weekends, he likes to put on the boards, throw up rooster tails. And then Marge Deton. Marge is 104. Her grandson actually lives in the Twin Cities here. She starts her day with lifting weights. She rides her bicycle, and then she gets in a root beer-colored 1994 Cadillac Seville and tears down the San Bernardino Freeway, where she still volunteers for 7 different organizations. I've been on 19 hardcore expeditions. I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet who rode his bicycle across the Sahara Desert without sunscreen. But I'll tell you, there was no adventure more harrowing than riding shotgun with Marge Deton. A stranger's a friend I haven't met yet, she'd say to me. So what are the common denominators in these 3 cultures? What are the things that they all do? And we managed to boil it down to 9. In fact, we've done 2 more Blue Zone expeditions since this, and these common denominators hold true. And the first one, and I'm about to utter a heresy here, none of them exercise. At least the way we think of exercise. Instead, they set up their lives so that they're constantly nudged into physical activity. These 100-year-old Okinawan women are getting up and down off the ground. They sit on the floor 30 or 40 times a day. The Sardinians live in vertical houses, up and down the stairs. Every trip to the store or to church or to the friend's house occasions a walk. They don't have any conveniences. There's not a button to push to do yard work or housework. If they want to mix up a cake, they're doing it by hand. That's physical activity. That burns calories just as much as going on the treadmill does. When they do intentional physical activity, it's things they enjoy. They tend to walk, the only proven way to stave off cognitive decline, and they all tend to have a garden. They know how to set up their life in the right way so they have the right outlook. Each of these cultures take time to downshift. The Sardinians pray, the Seventh-day Adventists pray, the Okinawans have this ancestor veneration. But when you're in a hurry or stressed out, that triggers something called the inflammatory response, which is associated with everything from Alzheimer's disease to cardiovascular disease. When you slow down for 15 minutes a day, you turn that inflammatory state into a more anti-inflammatory state. They have vocabulary for sense of purpose, ikigai, like the Okinawans. You know, the two most dangerous years in your life are the year you're born because of infant mortality and the year you retire. These people know their sense of purpose and they activate in their life. That's worth about 7 years of extra life expectancy. There's no longevity diet. Instead, these people drink a little bit every day, not a hard sell to the American population. They tend to eat a plant-based diet. Doesn't mean they don't eat meat, but lots of beans and nuts. And they have strategies to keep from overeating, little things that nudge them away from the table at the right time. And then the foundation of all this is how they connect. They put their families first, take care of their children and their aging parents. They all tend to belong to a faith-based community, which is worth between 4 and 14 extra years of life expectancy if you do it 4 times a month. And the biggest thing here is they also belong to the right tribe. They were either born into or they proactively surrounded themselves with the right people. We know from the Framingham studies that if your 3 best friends are obese, there's a 50% better chance that you'll be overweight. So if you hang out with unhealthy people, that's going to have a measurable impact over time. Instead, if your friend's idea of recreation is physical activity, bowling or playing hockey or biking or gardening, if your friends drink a little but not too much and they eat right and they're engaged and they're trusting and trustworthy, that is going to have the biggest impact over time. Diets don't work. No diet in the history of the world has ever worked for more than 2% of the population. Exercise programs usually start in January. They're usually done by October. When it comes to longevity, there is no short-term fix in a pill or anything else. But when you think about it, your friends are long-term adventures, and therefore perhaps the most significant thing you can do to add more years to your life and life to your years. Thank you very much.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I really like that video. I also am fascinated with the blue zones. If you want to come to my office, I have some really cool books on the blue zones, as well as cooking books, etc. And maybe I'll bring them to class sometime. So definitely know about the blue zones. And now we are going to get into theories of aging. So theories of aging are actually probably the most technical part of this class that we're going to cover. So if you feel a little bit overwhelmed with the technicality, that's okay. You may need to just listen a couple times and read to reinforce the material. And in fact, your first article is actually going to be on theories of aging. So once we get through this theories of aging component, I think the class will be less technical and, I don't know, just easier conceptually. So there are different categories of theories. Some theories ask how we age, meaning what specific part ages, what causes the body to eventually die and shut down, what are the metabolic pathways involved, what are the hormonal pathways involved, and then other theories asks, why do we age? Is there some signal that our body sends out that tells us to age? Is it better for the population that we age? Is it for religious reasons that we age? And so we're going to look at some of these theories. I love listening to these theories and reading about them, but I will say they can kind of send you down a rabbit hole. I will ask you for sure what the most common theories of aging are. I may not ask you very many details within each one because you'll find that it's quite complex. And you will also find that many of them sound similar and are overlapping, and that's totally what we expect. Many of the theories have similar components and overlap quite a lot. So these are the theories that we are going to talk about. And yeah, we're going to talk about these. So to begin, the cross-linking glycation hypothesis. So this hypothesis has to do with the formation of cross-links between proteins in our body. Remember, DNA is made up of proteins, amino acids, and the change in structure that those links can produce. Crosslinks can occur many ways, but one of the ways that crosslinks can form between proteins is with glucose molecules attaching to them. So there are some parts of this theory that blame high circulating levels of blood glucose, as you might find in diabetes that's uncontrolled, as contributing to the aging process. So what happens is we have these kinks or extra bonds between our proteins, and that can change the protein function. Normally, our body has a system of checks and balances to be able to get rid of any proteins that are damaged, and that's using proteases or enzymes that can break down them. However, in aging, this theory says that we have so many damaged proteins, they accumulate, and our proteases can't keep up with them, aren't able to eliminate all of them, and they begin to build up and accumulate in our bodies. We can see some examples in nature and our skin. So for example, crosslinks in the collagen can lead to brown spots and wrinkles. Crosslinks in the arteries can lead to atherosclerosis, which is a hardening and thickening of the arteries. And some people believe that plaques and tangles that form in Alzheimer's disease, as well as potentially blood vessel damage in kidney disease, are due to cross-linking. So some pictures, this is me, and I'm proudly displaying my wrinkles and the cross-linking that I have experienced through my years as exhibited on my face. Above me, you can see what healthy skin would look like that does not have any cross-links, and then when collagen binds with each other due to sugar cross-links, and you get the effect of wrinkling, sunspots, etc. This is another picture. Healthy collagen fibers are very flexible, and then underneath that skin matrix, you see that the collagen can bind to one another. So they've actually done studies on what might help reduce glycation crosslinks, and they actually love to study worms for aging. There's a model of worms called C. elegans, and it's one of the most popular models to study aging in. And so in C. elegans, they gave them vitamin D, and it actually reduced their misfolded proteins 30%. So there is some evidence that perhaps vitamin D can play a role in reducing this. That's a possibility. And yeah, so although this is shown as wrinkles on the skin, if this is happening on the outside of your body, imagine what it's like on the inside of your body. And so that's where atherosclerosis and those types of issues can happen. The next theory, this is probably the most complicated of the theories of aging, but it has so much overlap with other theories. So this theory is the most popular theory of aging. And it includes 3 different theories that have some overlap. So we're going to talk about those 3 theories that have some overlap. All in all, the theory is trying to say that if we reproduced later, that would delay the aging process. So the very first part of this theory is the mutation accumulation theory. And this is the inability of natural selection to influence late life traits. So, for example, genes that have negative effects later in life continue to be passed from generation to generation. And this is very similar to the next theory. So the force of natural selection with age doesn't actually favor these mutations. So for example, if you had a mutation that increased your survival chances when young, but decreased your survival chances in old age, it would allow you to get through that young age and reproduce, but it may cause death later on. Theory of antagonistic pleiotrophy. Okay, so this is very similar. So this says a gene that increases survival to reproductive age will be favored by natural selection, even if it decreases life expectancy later. And the example of this is, well, there's multiple examples, but for example, in animals, male peacocks have very large genital organs, and that ensures that they're able to reproduce and their genetics is transferred on to the next generation. However, those large genital organs actually make it very difficult for them to escape from predators. So they have shortened longevity, even though they continue to pass those genes on. Another example is testosterone in males. So this is going to overlap with one of the endocrine theories of aging, but high testosterone levels in males at a young age are associated with increased reproduction, possibly increased attractiveness to a mate, and so the genetic material will be passed on. However, as one gets older, very high testosterone levels are associated with increased risk of prostate cancer and heart disease. So it doesn't actually ensure the longevity of the species. There is another type of mutation in humans called Laron syndrome, and this is a type of dwarfism that protects them from cancer because they don't have very high levels of growth factor. So the growth factor is beneficial and it protects them from cancer, but at a later age, because they're so small, they usually end up dying from accidents. And I'm not kidding. There's a population in South America and they usually end up dying from accidents and trauma because of their height. The disposable soma theory of aging explains that organisms have to balance the demands of reproduction and the demands of maintaining their soma or their body. And we only have so much energy. So sometimes all the energy that we have is put into reproduction, and there's not enough energy left to help repair systems in our body, and therefore our body ages, but we're able to successfully reproduce. And you will read about some of the animals that have very strong energy outputs to reproduction, even causing the end of life as they reproduce. So the idea with these theories is that delaying the age of reproduction would select against some of these traits that are beneficial in life early on, but not beneficial later on, and would lengthen lifespan. But because we don't reproduce at a very old age, we don't do that, and therefore we do age. Okay. So this one has a lot of overlap. This is the genome maintenance hypothesis of aging, and this is based on DNA damage. So DNA damage is happening every day. The majority of the damage occurs due to free radicals or electrons that have elements that have one electron in them and are looking for another one to become stable. We produce free radicals ourselves just by daily metabolism. Metabolic processes produce free radicals, but we're also exposed to a bunch of free radicals from our environment and from things that we eat or drink or smoke, pollution in the air, etc. And there's a lot of other damage to DNA that can happen as well due to mutations, etc. Since our DNA is so important, again, our body has a good system for preventing damage to it. However, not all mutations will be fixed and or destroyed, and so we can pass mutations on to our offspring. Some of these will occur after reproduction, meaning some of the mutations will show their effect after one has already reproduced. And so in that way, a couple wouldn't necessarily know there was a mutation that they're passing on. Like, for example, my mother has a spontaneous mutation in a gene called von Hippel-Lindau, and that causes her to have a very high rate of tumors in her spine, her brain, her pancreas, her kidney. And she did not find that out till she was in her 40s, at which time she had already had me. And later I was tested for it, and I also accumulated that gene. So the fact that we've accumulated that gene and we didn't know about it prior to reproduction contributes to aging overall in a population. Also, the fact that neither of our bodies could repair that gene. Some gene and DNA mutations are so severe that they can't be repaired. And so a simple example, besides the one that I've just given, would be white blood cells. So white blood cells in elderly people have 6 times the DNA damage than they do in young people, and this can lead to reduced immune function in elderly. And so this might be why elderly seem to get sick more often, have worse responses to the flu, the cold, pneumonia, anything, because their white blood cells have suffered from DNA damage. There is also a lot of damage in mitochondrial DNA, and we're going to talk about mitochondria in the upcoming lectures, but mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cells where ATP is made. So if there's DNA damage in the mitochondria, we can't produce enough energy, and we're going to have age-related decline. Neuroendocrine hypothesis of aging. So, I want to go back and say one more example of this gene maintenance hypothesis. So an example of a mutation is a cystic fibrosis carrier, which I am also a cystic fibrosis carrier. Cystic fibrosis is a horrible disease that causes you to secrete very sweaty, thick mucus that can clog your respiratory system, your pancreas, your kidneys, your digestive system. It's recessive, it's passed down. You have to inherit 1 copy from each parent. However, if you only inherit 1 copy and not 1 copy from each parent, it actually reduces your risk of dying of cholera and typhoid fever because you have half as many chloride channels. And so you won't get as dehydrated if you get these diseases that cause hideous amounts of diarrhea. You will lose less fluid in these diarrhea type diseases. It's not beneficial long-term because if you mate with another person who has cystic fibrosis, you could have a child with cystic fibrosis, which would delay their lifespan, or they would have a significantly shortened lifespan. But cystic fibrosis can be genetic, and it can be a mutation that has already been passed down without repair. Okay, neuroendocrine hypothesis of aging. So this has to do with our reproductive, well, not just reproductive, our hormonal system and our nervous system. So the endocrine system is our hormonal system. The nervous system is our brain and all the signals that we send. We have seen in many models that hormone regulation becomes less functional with age. For example, there are hormones that we make that regulate blood pressure. And with age, our blood pressure suffers from misregulation of these hormones. There are hormones that we make that regulate our sleep cycle, such as melatonin, cortisol. And with age, there's misregulation in these hormones, leading to poor sleep, which actually can lead to lower lifespan. Women go through menopause, and after menopause, they often have a few years of major hormone dysfunction. Men may have severe drops in testosterone as they age, which some of that is protective, but if it's too much, it can be deleterious. So hormone reduction is a little bit complicated because we generally think of this as not necessarily a good thing, but it can actually lengthen lifespan. So I talked about the testosterone in males, and too much testosterone can lead to heart disease and prostate cancer in elderly males. If an elderly male has not enough testosterone, or there have been cases where there's no testosterone, the male may not be necessarily happy with that, but it will produce longevity. So, for example, there were men called eunuchs, and this was a castrated man. This was done in Korea, and these men were castrated so that they could guard the women's living areas of temples and castles at the Argentine courts. And in these men, the men who had their testicles removed or who were castrated were 130 times more likely to live to 100 years old. And on average, they had lifespans that were 20 years longer than the average male. So that's an example where hormonal reduction actually lengthens lifespan. High testosterone levels in men, while they may be favorable early on, they are associated with riskier behavior, increased risks of depression, increased risks of suicide. As far as women go, we do think that menopause and the changes in estrogen do help women live a little longer. However, there are some negative things with that as well, and women after menopause tend to gain more weight, have higher risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc., than men do because of these hormonal changes. So we're not exactly sure about the relationship, and that is one of the reasons why this particular hypothesis is not necessarily the strongest, or that this hypothesis may not transfer to both genders. But we're still learning about this. So, yeah. Okay, oxidative damage, free radical hypothesis of aging. I already talked about DNA damage, so this is going to have like almost 100% overlap. But this is DNA damage specifically occurring due to oxidative free radicals. And like I said, oxidative free radicals are one of the normal byproducts of normal cell metabolism. They can accumulate over time. If we don't have a good oxidative defense system, we're going to see more DNA damage. So we have a lot of our own kind of antioxidant molecules and systems. One of our biggest antioxidant systems is called glutathione. And so if we're deficient in that process or that cycle, we may see elevated oxidative stress. There are dietary factors that can lead to elevated oxidative stress, etc. And we have linked oxidative stress directly with Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. With this oxidative stress theory, we believe that the mitochondria are both the creators of the oxidants and the victims of the oxidants, because the mitochondria with normal metabolism produce these free radicals. We also get free radicals from UV light, air pollution, radiation, smoking, inflammation, etc., and they damage the mitochondria's ability to reproduce ATP. When the mitochondria can't produce ATP, eventually cells die, and if cells can't get energy, eventually organ systems will fail. What about antioxidants? There is a lot of hype about antioxidant supplements, but in almost all studies, antioxidant in a supplement form is not beneficial. And in some studies, it is even harmful. So if you're going to consume an antioxidant, it should be in a food source or a natural whole food versus a supplement. The rate of living theory of aging. So this is the symbolist theory of aging, and you probably need a break from that complicated stuff. But this is just the belief that we have some finite amount of substance or time that sustains life, and once we use it all, it's gone, and that's aging, and that's the end. So for example, you may have a certain number of heartbeats or a certain number of breaths. And there's been some Hollywood movies kind of based on this theory of aging. The replicative senescence hypothesis of aging. So this one is one that I really like. And again, there's a lot of overlap, but this is looking at one specific part of the chromosome. So each human cell divides itself millions and millions of times to reproduce so that we can generate more cells. And cell division requires new DNA, DNA to be copied into RNA, RNA to be made into proteins, etc. And so each cell can only divide a certain time, and that division number is called the Hayflick limit. In humans, each cell can divide approximately 40 to 60 times, and once it has reached this limit or done that many divisions, it is referred to as senescent. And remember, I talked about senescent cells earlier on. They're not functional, but they still produce chemicals that may be harmful. The replicative senescence hypothesis of aging states that, hold on. So the replicative senescence theory says that with each cell division, something called the telomere shortens. And the telomere is a protective cap at the end of the chromosome. So in this picture, it's shown in black. But with every cell division, the telomere shortens. And when the telomere is gone, the chromosome is no longer protected, and the chromosome will stop dividing. And so the material kept in that chromosome will be unable to be replicated. You can actually have your telomere number measured. There are some places in Los Angeles and San Francisco who will do this for you. And we do believe that this is what's called one of the biomarkers of aging and might predict how healthy you are and kind of your longevity. This is something relatively new. In 2009, the Nobel Peace Prize was given, or the Nobel Prize, not Peace Prize, but the Nobel Prize was given for the discovery of telomeres and their relationship to aging. And so that is only 10 years ago. So we're learning more and more about telomeres every day. What we do know about telomeres is there are different environmental factors that can accelerate their shortening. And there are environmental factors that can reduce their shortening. So, for example, healthy diet actually lengthens telomeres. Exercise, low stress, walking, plant-based diets that are low in refined carbs, and family time lengthen telomeres or are associated with longer telomeres. Smoking decreases telomere length. Mediterranean diets have been associated with longer telomeres. And breastfeeding in babies has been associated with longer telomeres. Soda, however, is not associated with longer telomeres. And I have this study where they looked at soda consumption in adults aged 20 to 65 years, and they measured their telomere length. And what they found was with regular soda, there was significant shortening of the telomeres. So each 8-ounce serving of soda or sugar-sweetened beverages was associated with approximately 1.9 years of life reduction. When they looked at non-sugary sodas or diet sodas, they did not find that same relationship. And when they looked at 100% fruit juice, they found that 100% fruit juice was actually associated with longer telomeres. So it's important to know what factors may strengthen or provide longer telomere lifespan versus factors that are going to have telomeres shortening more rapidly. This theory is not perfect, however, because not all tissues contain actively replicating cells. And telomere shortening is not universal among species. So, for example, mice have telomeres that are 5 to 10 times longer than humans. So you would expect them to live a lot longer than humans based on their telomere length, but their lifespan is 30 times shorter. And we often use mice or rats in models that study aging. So we can see that there's a huge difference between humans in that. Also, when we think about the benefits of having longer telomeres, certain types of cells, it would actually be detrimental to have longer telomeres. So for example, cancer cells, we wouldn't want cancer cells to have a long telomere life and continue replicating. And so therefore, when we look into some of the mechanisms that might help lengthen telomeres or extend telomere lifetime, we worry that this could also transfer over to cancer cells. There are currently dietary supplements on the market that will claim to increase your telomere length or lengthen your telomeres, and we still need to investigate these more thoroughly. I don't think any of them have currently been proven, and there's some risk, like I said, because we don't want all cells to live this long or live forever. But this is a very interesting theory. The last theory that we're going to talk about, although by no means the last theory in general, is the genetic or program theories of aging. And so this is supported by observations that lifespan is species specific. So, for example, in humans, we have maximum lifespans that we usually see. In dogs, we see maximum lifespans. Elephants have maximum lifespans. Mice have maximum lifespans. However, within each of those species, there are large variations within the lifespan. So in your article that you're going to read, you're going to see that in general, larger species tend to live longer. However, within a species, a smaller animal will live longer. So, for example, a dog would live longer than a mouse, but within dogs, a Chihuahua would live longer than a Great Dane. This is also true in humans. So humans who are smaller actually tend to live longer. And a lot of that has to do with the hormonal stuff. So that's also true in humans. Some genetic factors that have to do with either longer lifespan within a species or shorter lifespan within a species do exist. So there are longevity genes. We've identified them in worms. We've identified them in bats. We've identified them in mice. In humans, loss of a mutation in SERPINE1 is considered a longevity mutation. There are mutations in adiponectin that are considered longevity mutations. There are mutations in FOXO that are considered longevity mutations. And in mice, I mentioned this Laron syndrome, mice that have Laron syndrome live 50% longer. So we do have some genes that we're looking at to mark as longevity genes. That being said, we could also look at some genetic conditions that are not associated with longevity. So progeria, for example, progeria literally means premature old age, and it's a genetic syndrome that's very rare. 1 in 8 million children live with progeria. Their lifespan is 10 to 13 years, and they experience all the diseases of aging. They accelerate, their age is accelerated 8 to 10 times faster than normal. So they age at an accelerated rate. They get heart disease, they get arthritis, they get eye disease. It's just really, really sad what these children go through. But they have been a very interesting model to study as far as genes that contribute to rapid aging. Down syndrome is also a condition. Down syndrome is a chromosomal genetic issue. And children with Down syndrome used to only live until age 10. Now the lifespan is closer to 50 or 60. But people who have Down syndrome also experience age-related diseases at a much more rapid pace. So studying some of these people within the human species can help us learn about variations of this maximum lifespan. So, I think that that is all I'll do for this lecture, because I know that that was super heavy. I promise you it will get less intense, and I really appreciate you listening, and you won't regret it because you will see questions on your midterm and possibly your quizzes. Okay, thanks. Bye.